Good morning, this is your Stats Sensei, Mr. Spensei, and this is test review on surveys and bias. A statistics teacher wants to know how her students feel about an introductory statistics course. She decides to administer a survey to a random sample of students taking the course. She has several sampling plans to choose from. Name the sampling strategy in each. It's interesting to note that they said it was a random sample. That kind of eliminates the idea of it being convenient. So convenience should not be an answer. So there are four ranks of students taking the class from freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors. Randomly select 15 students from each class rank. Hey, we're randomly selecting from a group. Anytime it mentions group, and we broke it into groups, anytime it mentions groups, it's either going to be cluster or stratified. In a cluster, you select all, you randomly select the group, and then you select all. In a stratified, you randomly select from each group. So we're randomly selecting from each class rank slash group. So this first one is stratified. All right, part B. Randomly select a class rank and survey every student in that class rank. So randomly select a group. So we're selecting a group and surveying all. So group with all is going to be cluster. Each student has a 9-digit number. Randomly choose 60 numbers. So it sounds like we're either using a random number generator or putting all the names in a hat and drawing. This is random. This is a simple random sample because everyone has a good equal chance of being selected. Finally, use the class roster and select every fifth. Anytime you have something like nth, whether the second, the third, the fourth, the 10th, the 100th, this makes this a systematic sample. So this is a systematic sample. We randomly select the first one, and then every fifth one after that. So if we'd selected the third, we choose three, then five, add five is eight, then five more is 13, then five more is 18, et cetera, et cetera. All right. Explain the second plans suggested above, sampling all students from one class rank may be biased. Be sure to name the types of bias. All right. So, why might the cluster sample, because they say in the second plan, so this is the second plan right here, why might the cluster sample be biased? Well, there could be an overrepresentation of one class rank. All right, we could overrepresent one class rank. If we overrepresent one, that means we're underrepresenting another. That makes undercoverage bias. All right, when you overrepresent something, that means you're underrepresenting. Underrepresenting is undercoverage bias. So it's possible that your clusters don't look like the population. All right. Maybe it has too many freshmen or too many sophomores. If it has too many freshmen, then you're undercovering the juniors and the upperclassmen. So undercoverage bias. Remember, another term for undercoverage bias is selection bias. All right. Name and describe the type of bias that might be present if the stats teacher decides that instead of randomly selected students to survey on how they feel about the course, she just asked students to volunteer. Oh, volunteer. That means there was no random selection and they volunteered. So this is voluntary response bias. All right. And only those who and it's voluntary response bias. And who's going to respond to that? Only those that feel strongly. Those that don't care, the meh, those in the middle are not going to respond. All right. Explain how undercoverage bias and response bias uh, could occur if the survey is given out loud in class. Undercoverage, not everyone's going to answer. All right. Undercoverage, not everyone's going to answer. Some of the ones who are shy about it aren't going to answer. Okay. Those in the middle, the ones who feel strongly, oh, I love this course, they're going to answer. And those who hate the course may answer, but those are like, meh, they're not going to care enough. So we're going to miss the ones in the middle. The response bias is it's a sensitive question. No one, most students here aren't going to tell the teacher that their class stinks and the teacher is horrible. So they're going to feel uncomfortable giving an honest response. Also, they're going to be concerned about their peers. All right. So, because it's being out loud, they may feel peer pressure not to give the honest response, and they're not likely to tell the teacher the truth. Oh, your class is great. You're the best. When secretly, as they walk out of the room, and say they're horrible. All right. At a retail store, management at a retail store is concerned about the possibility of drug abuse by people who work there. They decide to check on the extent of the problem by having a random sample, yay, like to see that, of employees undergo a drug test. Name the sampling strategy in each of the proposed plans. All right. Randomly select an employee classification and test all. Okay, so we have a group and we're testing all. Remember, if it's a group, it's either going to be cluster or stratified. If it's all, this is a cluster. So this is a cluster. Choose every fourth person. All right, as soon as you have nth, that makes it a systematic. All right, there are 4 employee groups, classifications, supervisors, full-time clerks, etc. Randomly select 10 from each category / group. Again, once again, if you have a group, it's either going to be a cluster or stratified. Cluster, you survey all. Stratify, you survey from each group. So this is a stratified. The last one, each employee has a 3-digit identification number. Randomly choose from those identification numbers. All right, we either use a random number generator, a simulation, or put all the numbers in a hat and drew. But regardless, this is a simple random sample. Okay, continuing on. Explain why the first plan in problem 4, sampling an entire classification, might be biased. All right. So if in 4, it says randomly select an employee classification and survey all the people in that group. Well, that group may not represent the entire company. Matter of fact, we know it didn't include all the groups because it said we have a group of supervisors, full-time clerks, part-time clerks, and maintenance staff. Maybe we're surveying the supervisors. Maybe we're surveying the part-time clerks. Maybe we're surveying the maintenance staff. But it's possible that each one of those groups has different opinions. So we really don't know that it's representative. So it's under coverage bias. We're not going to get all, we're not going to, if we survey the supervisors, we're not getting the rest of these. So we overrepresented supervisors and underrepresented the others. So cluster sampling might be biased because we're looking at one classification, which would indicate undercoverage bias because it's only at one classification and we're missing the others. All right. So we didn't cover the others. Also note selection bias, same thing as undercoverage. Name and describe the kind of bias that might be present if management decides that instead of subjecting people to random testing, they just hold department meetings and drug test employees that attend. What do you think is going to happen? I think I'm not going to, if I'm doing the drugs and I know about this, I'm not going to attend the department meetings. So this would be undercoverage bias. All right. Undercoverage bias because not everyone attends the department meetings. They skip out. And remember, undercoverage bias could also be selection bias. Offer additional employee discounts for those who agree to be drug tested. Well, once again, if you agree, if you choose to do it, that means you're volunteering. Oh, I'm going to volunteer. Voluntary response bias because you choose to be tested. And by the way, who's going to choose to be tested? It's going to be override those with strong opinions. It's going to overrepresent those who are not using drugs. It's like, oh yeah, I volunteer. Why? Because I'm not using drugs. or maybe I volunteer and I am using drugs because I want to get fired, but really, most people are not going to volunteer unless they're not using drugs. All right, number 7. Administrators at a hospital are concerned about the possibility of drug abuse by people who work there. They decide to check on the extent of the problem by having a random sample of the employees undergo a drug test. Name the sampling strategy in each of the proposed plans. There are 4 employee classifications: doctors, medical staff, nurses, etc. Randomly select 10 people from each category. Okay, we have groups. As I've said before, if you have groups, it's either going to be cluster or stratified. In a cluster, we survey all. In the stratification, we select from each group. Here, we're selecting from each group randomly, so this is stratified. Each employee has a 4-digit ID number. Randomly choose 4 numbers. Well, or 40 numbers. So basically, we put all the numbers in a hat, or we used the random number generator, and everybody had a good chance of being selected. This is a simple random sample. At work, at the start of each shift, choose every 10th person. Anytime it has the nth, that makes it systematic. All right. Randomly select a department. All right. And test all the people who work in the department. So as long as we're broken into groups, we know it's either going to be stratified or cluster, but cluster is survey all. This is survey all, so this is going to be a cluster. All right. Explain why the last plan sampling an entire department might be biased. Be sure to name the kinds of bias. Well, we know that we have office staff, support staff, custodians, maintenance, etc. Here, or excuse me, we have doctors, nurses, technicians, clerks, custodians. And are we surveying all of them? No. All right, we're only surveying a group. So we're under coverage. All right. Because certain job types might not be represented. All right. If we choose a department, radiology, and test all the people, so yeah, we got doctors, nurses, technicians, clerks, custodians, etc., and we got all those different groups. But is radiology necessarily going to be the same as neurology or surgeons, etc.? There could be, each department could be different. So this would be selection bias, or we could use the word under coverage. Please remember, selection and under coverage mean the same thing. I prefer the word under coverage, but sometimes on multiple choice, it'll say selection bias, and if you use selection bias, it's not wrong. That is correct. Name and describe the kind of bias that might be present if the administration decides that instead of subjecting people to random testing, they'll just interview people about drug abuse. Sir, do you use drugs, abuse drugs? No, of course not. I mean, you can let me into the pharmacy. I don't use them. We might be inclined to lie. It's a sensitive question. If it's a sensitive question and you might be inclined to lie, it's going to be response. Ask people to volunteer. If you volunteer and we didn't randomly select, then it's voluntary response bias. So this is going to be a voluntary response bias. All right. I hope that helped. Good luck on your test and hope to see you on the next one. Thank you.